All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the November Delaware County Juvenile Detention Board of Managers meeting. Can we all rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I'd also like to mention that joining us via audio is our Vice Chair, Marie Williams. Sean, anyone else or just Marie?
Just Marie so far.
Okay. And just let us know if anyone else joins.
Yes, we'll do.
First item, as always, is public comment, and the public comment at the outset is only for items that are on the agenda. And if members of the public would like to speak, please go to the podium, keep your mask on, give your name and address, and keep your comments to less than 5 minutes. Anyone from the public? All right. Next item is an approval of the minutes of the October meeting. Were there any questions or comments on the minutes?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion is second. Any other questions, comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next item is the monthly report, juvenile court, and probation services.
Good afternoon. My name is Kirsten Keenan /Fitzsimmons, or AKA Fitzsimmons. I'm the resource supervisor for Delaware County Juvenile Probation, and I'm just going to be providing the current detention census as of today. We currently have 6 juveniles in detention, 1 in Bucks County, 1 in Chester County, 1 in Montgomery County, and we currently have 3 youths out at Aspire, and Aspire has asked for the removal of one of our youths due to continued behaviors. So that's the current census as of today. Are there any questions?
Any questions from the board?
Do you know where that youth they've asked to remove, where that youth will go?
We have no options at this time, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
I do have a question. Any issues detaining anyone as a result of available beds?
Absolutely.
So I guess generally similar to the case scenario that Ms. Fitzsimmons just spoke about, is that as a detention removal, no other detention centers will accept. Right now they are working on an in-home option because a residential option may not be available. We had another young person who was being removed from a detention center because of behaviors last week. With no other option, a home plan was put in place, which includes a monitor. Came home on Thursday or Friday and absconded on Sunday. Similar to some other bench warrants that we've had where we've also used an alternative, and they have subsequently cut the monitor off and remain as absconding or an absconder. We've had other juveniles, and I know that we've received some inquiries from police departments specifically where the juvenile was charged for a new offense, either a new offense by itself or had a history, and where the individual would have qualified for detention under the JCJC detention codes, but also scored high enough on the risk assessment to have resulted in detention, but there were no secure beds available, so alternatives were used in those circumstances as well.
Mr. Matei, do you have a count in the past month of how many juveniles should have been detained, but they weren't because of the lack of beds? I mean, I've received calls on a weekly basis from police departments complaining that these juveniles are committing heinous crimes, aggravated assault on police, firearm, robbery, and they're not being detained because of lack of beds.
So there's probably, on average, 2 to 3 a week that are returning to the community immediately because there's no secure bed option. Again, they would otherwise have qualified for detention based on the event, and also because they would have scored high enough on the assessment to have warranted a decision of detention.
So then they get put on an ankle bracelet?
Yes.
And do we have
and
a
in-home
count?
detention, and then they're expected to report to the office, generally in media, on the next business day to try to get a handle on the circumstances and to develop a more intensive plan. And in those cases, some of those cases that I just talked about are the ones that within the 48 hours, especially with the weekend, they cut the monitor off, and then they are no longer available to us.
And then what happens once they cut the monitor off? What happens then?
Well, in the situation this weekend, for example, we did secure another monitor from another provider in case we were able to locate or apprehend, because we knew that we did not have a bed available to detain, which is what we would normally do either on a bench warrant or if the monitor had been cut off during an alternative.
So basically, we can't detain them because there's no beds to detain them once they commit not the crime, but commit another crime by cutting the bracelet off. We can't do anything about it.
In several of those situations, I was not able to securely detain them.
Do you know how many juveniles have cut their bracelets off in the past month?
I do not have an exact count, but I can get one.
So can I follow up with that? So 2 to 3 a week, in the last month, that's 8 to 12 have gone into the community instead of a secure facility.
Yeah, they're either leaving a secure facility because they've been asked to remove and there's no other option for a lateral, or they've been apprehended and there's been no bed available, or they've been picked up on a previously issued judicial bench warrant and there's been no bed available, so an alternative was developed with to use a monitor.
Okay, so that's somewhere between 8 and 12 times in the last month. And of those 8 to 12?
I would say 8 to 10 in the last 6 weeks.
Okay. And of those, how many have not gone smoothly? You know, they didn't adhere to the rules. You have one that cut off their monitor.
Well, I have 2 right now who cut off the monitor
Mm-hmm.
and still remain at large. I have one being removed now that will likely be placed on a GPS monitor and programming of some sort. I have one that was, sorry, we accounted for that one. And then we have some others that are on the monitors, but, you know, they may be having violations, but we're just having them report in or respond with probation and just trying to keep a more intensive supervision with them while they're pending.
So they're on their monitors that are home and you're supervising them, but without incident, those other ones?
Yes.
And
And I
the
can get
2
you numbers on those.
Okay, that'd be great. And then, just out of curiosity, I'm sorry.
So these sound to me like precisely the kinds of hard cases that YAP said they have extensive experience working with. So I wondered, given what sounds like a crisis mode, whether we're moving forward with working with YAP, and if you could give us a status update on that.
I think I heard part of that, and I apologize, it was a little difficult, but I think she was inquiring about YAP.
That's
Yes.
right.
Okay.
To paraphrase what I think she said, what I heard was, you're describing a crisis situation in the way you're describing this. These sounds like circumstances that YAP has had success with in the past. Where do we stand on a contract with YAP?
Well, I believe that there's been preliminary conversation since our last meeting with the gentleman who is a representative from YAP, and we anticipate scheduling a meeting with them in the next couple of weeks to talk about what they're offering in total in terms of their program, because I know that there were some things that they were not interested in doing for us. I'm not sure that any of the youth that we were talking about would have qualified for that particular alternative to placement, because they are more of a long-term supervision model from what I understood from my preliminary discussions. We're talking more in terms of short-term secure holding for those that, you know, have new cases pending or that have been picked up on pre-adjudicatory warrants.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, YAP's a good program for some youth, but at times there are youth that commit crime that need to be detained for the safety of themselves and the community. So, I mean, we talk a lot about these programs, but what we don't talk a lot about is a secure detention facility in the county, which I think we need to get back to.
Let me follow-
Well, if I could, I'm sorry, I can't see the room, so it's hard for me not to talk over folks. But I would agree with that. Chris, I think that's you. I don't think the decision is between no detention and some detention. I think it goes without saying that some young people need to be removed from the community for their safety and for the safety of the community. What I'm suggesting is that if we're in a circumstance where we're having to put ankle bracelets on some young people that we might otherwise detain, might we not accelerate the conversation with YAP about how we might do that in the safest possible way? So absent the detention beds, and I think we all agree that we don't have those detention beds, perhaps we need to accelerate the conversation with YAP and see, to what extent they can customize their service to keep both the community and these young people safe.
Can I add, this is Shakima Townsend, and I'm on the line. I think the other piece that I'm hoping we could talk about, in addition to accelerating some alternative options, is the status of the contracts that we have and whether or not we're having conversations with our neighbors, Chester County, Monroe County, in terms of building a different contracting model so that we could at least have a temporary solution. And I don't know where we are with that. If you guys talked about that before I got on, I apologize for the repetitive question, but we need a diverse set of options, and it just seems like the process to get there is moving slower than any of us would like.
Yeah, Ms. Fulmore Townsend, we'll get to that later on in the meeting. There is an update with regard to a contract with Chester County.
I have a question, and maybe that will be informative, but is there, I recognize our limitations on what we have, and perhaps there's some expansion for Chester County, but there seems to be a case, at least every meeting, where there's someone that is being asked to leave the places that we have contracts. So my question is, are we in such a limited world that there are no other facilities either in the state or out of the state, or is there a prohibition on that? Because this is, to me, is really a crisis, and my recollection from one meeting was that, the people are going back to their homes, and their families are even concerned about them going home. So I don't know if there's an ability to just expand, just keep the expansion of trying to find facilities beyond what we have, because I think that my understanding is you've worked with the facilities that we have as best we can, and perhaps there's an update with a few more beds. But if Chester County doesn't like our youth, they get to call up and say, bring them, come get them. And it seems to me the worst case scenario is that we have to send them back home with an ankle brace. It just doesn't, it flies in the face of our law enforcement and community and the safety of the community. So, and I'm not asking you to answer that.
Well, I guess
other than for other resources.
Yeah, I guess I could offer that in addition to calling our contracted providers, we also call all of the, in a lot of cases when there's some severe circumstances like the removal from an individual that we had anticipated that he might cut off the monitor and run. He had done it previously. So when we knew that that was the circumstance that we were faced with, we also called all the other detention centers that we don't contract with and said, is there a chance that you could lend us a bed similar to a bed that we borrowed, as you've heard me speak before, from another county. And I think that now with the Schumann Center having closed in September, the beds there is even a higher competition to secure those beds. So as soon as we take a child out, that bed is gone to someone else. In the situation with the young person who Philadelphia did graciously hold for over a week for us, 2 weeks for us, as a courtesy, because we had a warrant, and again, we didn't have anywhere to put him until today. So we've been able to work out some arrangements with some of our other colleagues across the state, but they're limited because of the need and access, the limitation on access across the state. And again, I've said it here, and I've said it in a recent meeting with the state where we talked about the detention crisis. We've submitted our concerns to the state. I know that the state is looking at, possible regional options. One such discussion with OCYF on the western side of the state, and in hopes that if that is successful, that they would consider replicating that in other areas of the state. This is not unique to us. I think, again, we were never a county that had this issue. So in the past, other counties were reaching out to us, and traditionally Delaware County said, no to other counties, which I understand. We had limited staffing and other issues that we may not have been able to meet their needs, but now we're in that situation too, and we're one of the larger counties. And the staffing across the state in all of the facilities, there's a 60 to 70 bed wait just for a post-disposition state secure referral. And that's a facility that can't say no. But again, they have to be post-disposition. The cases that we're talking about primarily are cases that are pre-adjudicatory. So they can't go to all facilities. They are limited to only be able to go to the facilities that are licensed for that particular type of service.
Can I? Judge, Your Honor, go ahead.
My question is kind of coming from Mr. Eisman's comment at the beginning. Do you have a sense that there is a culture, there is a knowledge on the part of some juveniles who have been in the system before, that they know what the crisis is in terms of placements, and that therefore the word is out, hey, all you got to do is run. They don't have any place to put you. Am I going a little too far with that to make that assumption that some of them are doing that?
I think it's possible. I don't know for certain. I know of one case in particular where a child made a statement similar to, what are you going to do?
Right.
But I can't say that I've heard it enough to make that leap at this time.
Okay.
In fairness to the.
I also just want to be clear, there was a comment made, kids committing heinous crimes like armed robbery and not being, put in detention. I just want to be abundantly clear. We're talking about armed robbery. That would be something that would rise to the level of a felony and
Yes.
and would go to George W. Hill. Is that not?
No.
correct?
Well, it
We're
depends.
not?
They're only going to George W. Hill if they're charged as an adult. And they're only charged as an adult if they have a prior criminal record
Okay.
or a prior juvenile record, or if it's a homicide. Somebody that does a carjacking, a juvenile does a carjacking of a car, and it's his first time he ever carjacked somebody, he's charged as a juvenile.
And it depends on the circumstances in its totality, and that's certainly the discretion of the district attorney's office based on the elements of a direct file, the age, the offense, whether or not a weapon was used, whether or not there were.
It's very hard to get a juvenile charged as an adult unless they commit a homicide or something
Allegedly.
like that.
Question, you talk about removable behaviors. What are the identified behaviors that are?
Destruction of property, assaults on peers, assaults on staff, threatening behaviors, I'm going to cause some significant harm to someone. In most of the removals, there's been a combination of both. Just looking back, I know Chester County, I think there was destruction of multiple TVs in the group room and some other amenities.
Any sexualized behavior?
Not that's been reported.
And any charges come from the behaviors?
Yes.
That happen in the facilities?
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
there's subsequent cases that are filed
Sure.
as a result of those charges if the police were called and determined so.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in to say that, I don't think it will come as a surprise to anybody that young people in juvenile detention are sometimes prone to antisocial behavior. And that, unfortunately, we find ourselves in the situation where we can be refused beds because those counties need the beds for their own young people. But, I would just caution us a little bit to, spend a little bit more time on discussing the suite of solutions that we have at our disposal, and maybe not engaging in, what sometimes sounds like alarmist talk about what young people do. These are young people who are in conflict with the law. So we know they're going to do things that the community would rather them not do, that they might cause harm to other people, that they might cause harm to themselves. I just hope that we can talk a little bit more about some of the solutions that we have in the community. We've recently gotten a list of the providers We're still awaiting information on the contracts with those providers. I think all of that is essential for us to move forward with talking about the solutions. We know that there's crime. We know that it's awful. We know that young people cause harm. We know they cause harm to the community and themselves. I would love for us to talk a little bit also about the status of the contracts that we're waiting to see.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think that might be on our agenda. We did receive, thank you, we did receive that and was very thorough. I think for the board's purpose, moving forward, we have to have an understanding of the reality of what is going on in the detention centers with the staff, challenges. And yes, we understand that behaviors, acting out behaviors and other behaviors come from trauma, also come from being detained, loss of control. However, we have to understand that there are these behaviors and to expect behaviors if we're moving forward to plan for a detention center and or programming and to get the right staff.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I just wanted to say that we did get the list, thank you. And just to bring the board up to date, I was able to have my staff pull the contracts that were highlighted on the list, which are really the detention contracts, and that with the starter for those, because we can review them, but I think that they're being administered now, and we don't have the beds. So I'm leaning that while we work those contracts to the extent possible, and possibly Mr. Lazarus is going to give us an update on something today, we need to move forward to get our own facility.
Yeah, I would encourage, unless there are further questions specifically to Ms. DiMatteo, I would suggest that we get to Mr. Lazarus's update, because I think we're all expressing and understand that the current situation is not sustainable. And there are, updates at play in terms of options versus what we currently have.
I do have one more question.
Sure.
I want to get a better understanding of what the crisis is right now. So I'm just kind of finishing the chain of thought I started with. The two young people who have taken off their bracelets and broken the rules, were those two people also people who had been kicked out of another place?
So the one individual had previously absconded. The court issued a warrant. The young man was out on bail on a criminal case. Subsequently then responded. We had a warrant for him as well. He was picked up. The warrant was rescinded. He was placed on a monitor. And before Monday at 9, he had cut the monitor and absconded.
How old was he? He was 18?
He was 17, just 18. So he was teetering in both systems. I'm not sure if it was a direct file without looking at the criminal
So
docket.
since he was an adult and already had a previous criminal charge, but he still had a juvenile warrant, he would go back to the juvenile detention center to be held. If we had one.
Yes.
But
Instead,
since we don't have one, no other county is going to take an 18-year-old that has a juvenile warrant.
that's the other challenge that we have, is they don't want to take anyone who has pending criminal charges.
Right.
And the other young man who is 11, he was released on the monitor recently, as I said, Thursday or Friday, placed back with a provider in the community, and then I believe it was cut off sometime Sunday afternoon, evening, and he has not yet been apprehended as of coming here this evening.
And that's the one that was kicked out of the...
That was the one who was being removed from a detention center at their request. They were requesting a removal, and there was really no other place to go. And the case went back to court. And again, I don't disagree, or I actually agree with what Marie had offered earlier. And I'm not suggesting that all of those things aren't necessary, but I am suggesting that we do have, monitors at our disposal, and we have a half a dozen or so providers who are willing to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and put the bracelet on, and they're willing to work with our young people. But what the need is, or what we're suggesting we are seeing as the need, is having the ability to hold somebody securely when it's appropriate.
Okay, I have one last question, and then I'm finished. Before we had this issue, and things were going swimmingly, we had our detention center. Some people were put on monitors.
Oh, absolutely.
And did this happen when in other circumstances?
Certainly there were GPS violations.
Okay.
Yes.
So okay.
Yeah,
Then they were,
I couldn't
once
say
they
that.
violated, they were
Detention.
put back in detention though.
In some cases, yeah, in some cases, there was a graduated response. I mean, we deal with a lot of violations
Right.
for kids who are otherwise accountable in the home where the parents are available and depending on the circumstances. But a child who cuts off the monitor and is nowhere to be located. I mean, my staff was out yesterday morning because of the age of the young man, I believe knocking on doors, trying to locate him based on what mom suggested where he might be. And he was not located.
This is the 11-year-old?
Yes.
Thank you.
So those youth would go to detention until we could sort out how to manage them.
Right, right.
Any other questions for Ms. DiMatteo? Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I know the next thing on our report is report from committees. I would suggest that, in fact, I think really it goes, updates on both human resources and facilities, I think is going to go to what has been going on under the executive director. So, Howard, if you want to address the board.
Good afternoon. I have a couple items to give you an update on, and I'll start with budget. So what I have are for you, and I'll hand them out in hard copy, are the pages that are in the proposed budget that I sent to County Council about a week and a half ago. And it does outline what we are including for next year, with the understanding that there's a certain amount of uncertainty because we don't really know what the programs are going to be. So I will share those. So we can take a couple minutes and walk through it. Every agency in the county has a mission statement, and the one you see there is really what was provided last year as well. We're going to go over the next couple things under the old Frank Lloyd Wright expression that form follows function. So we're going to talk about functionality and programs as we walk through both the budget and then some of the other items that I'd like to talk about. So what we did with the budget this year also is go back to 2018 and provide the actual costs and then compare them to what's been budgeted, with the understanding that 2020 and 2021 were a bit of an anomaly because of the impact of the COVID pandemic. But what you do see is that there is a reduction in the total budget. Part of the reason for the reduction in wages and salaries is that we did move an FTE or a full-time equivalent position from juvenile detention into the county council budget to provide for a program manager position for community justice and rehabilitation. That's partially involved with juvenile detention, partly with the overall approach to community justice. I've also included the juvenile kitchen budget in here. Again, it's generally about 2/3 of what was previously budgeted. And these are the resources that will be available immediately upon adoption of the budget, pending other modifications or amendments, once we engage the new director, who will work directly with the Board of Managers to come up with the programs. What we're also moving towards in the budget is more performance-based budgeting. So we want to come up with programs that drive our assignment of resources and then monitor them using performance measures based upon SMART objectives. And on the next page, or page 3, you can see we're talking about objectives that provide for specific outcomes. What are we trying to do? What's the picture of success? And as you look at this and you want to fill these out, and then send back on the next page, there's a worksheet, a separate worksheet for every objective. These should be action-based statement. That should be something that who does what. We should avoid the use of passive voice because we want to establish responsibility and ownership of each objective. When we talk about measuring success, we want measures whenever possible that can be quantified to identify where does the data come from, because we need to know what we're looking for. And then once we know what the data is, what's the math? What's the calculation to come up with the conclusion? And then finally, what is the standard? What's the benchmark that we need to use? And it's better to get that before you embark upon any program, because we want to measure where we are before we start implementing new ideas. How do we attain success? What resources do we then need to get to the required outcome? And then again, what are the benchmarks that we're comparing to? And what methods do our peer organizations, the leading organizations, apply? How is this relevant to our goals and objectives? How does it advance the priorities of the board, of our approaches to community justice? And then finally, what's the time frame? How long is it going to take us to get there? And if we can start to identify those, as we look at the resources that are programmed now, we can identify if we're short, and if we're short, by how much, and then what do we hope to accomplish. Again, much of this will be driven by the director or superintendent who is hired, certainly first by the board of managers and then approved through council. So take your time, if you can provide that data back to me, fill out the forms, you can scan them and send them back. And I will work through budget to keep a record of that so that when we talk in the future about what's the right level of funding and staffing, we have a basis for that. And then we can measure, are we achieving success for the resources that we provide? So that's where we are with the budget. Council will adopt the budget at its second meeting in December. So there is a public hearing on the budget. Right now it's scheduled for December 7th. So we have the time to go through this. And even next year, if we're still uncertain, the allocation of resources will be there, and we can change whether it's wages and salaries, other expenses as we go through that. So provide that for your information. There was a small subcommittee that wanted to work extensively on the budget, so we can get your feedback on sort of the programs. We can work collaboratively to integrate that into a preliminary program. And then again, once the director's involved, we're engaged, we can get that person involved as well. So that's where we are on the budget. With regard to discussions with Chester County, I've talked about their administrative officer and the head of their human services, which is where their juvenile facility falls. They will get to us tomorrow basically the form of what would go into the contract agreement. When I spoke to them, we talked about reserving on a priority basis, probably 9 to 12 spaces. That may mean we pay for them even if we're not occupying them, but we will know with certainty that they're available to us. Right now, we do have an agreement with Chester County, but we're kind of treated on a par with all the other contracts they have. Throughout the criminal justice, community justice area, facilities are experiencing staffing shortages, both at the prison level and at the juvenile detention center. So one of the concerns that they have is staffing and how they can provide adequate supervision and oversight of the young adults that are placed in their care. Having said that, there is a very strong desire to support us, our neighbors to support us, and it will most likely result in an increased cost, but I will have that information. They committed by the end of tomorrow, so I'll be able to share that once I get it, and then we can move towards modifying the agreement we have with Chester County.
Mr. Lazar, just to pause on that one, because
Sure.
there may be some questions from the group. But first, can you talk a little bit about if you've had discussions around the concerns we've been having currently with our vendors refusing a particular juvenile, and how we're going to be dealing with that under contract with Chester County?
Well, Chester County is always going to reserve the right to not accept someone for valid reasons. And we'll have to spell out what those reasons are in the agreement so there's greater certainty in that. And I think that's a reasonable and understandable requirement on their part.
Okay, I just want to highlight that as something that's probably going to be a rubber meets the road issue for us going forward.
Councilmember Madden and I talked earlier today too, and one of the things that we should do for those who are interested is arrange a trip out to their facility. I know I've never seen it, and I'd like to get a better feel for what it looks like and see if it does actually comport with the goals, objectives, and values of this board. It may also give us some ideas about how and if we reshape our facility, what that would look like as well. So I can arrange that. We talked about sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas, so I'll work to get that set up as well. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that our county is not the only one having some staffing shortages. Is there a thought that some of these shortages are related or connected to the pandemic at all?
They are. It's a combination of people not coming to work, the vaccine mandates, which they don't have in Chester County. But there's also the issue of separating the young adults that are being detained. So those are impacting their ability to operate at their capacity.
I think another kind of near-term priority that we've had is getting our day-to-day director hired. It's not on the list, but can you give a brief update on where we stand there?
Sure. Members of the board interviewed candidates and had a preferred or recommended candidate. Personnel staff has conducted background checks, and they've all come back sterling. So really now it's a case of recommending a compensation level and negotiating with that individual to have him come on board.
I have to say, I think that's the total key thing that we have to do. We need a point person on staff that is going to run with this. So I know we did the interviews. It's been a couple of weeks, so we really need to, I don't know what that process looks like or when it can happen, but it can't happen soon enough.
Well, I would suggest we vote today on that candidate. I mean, we've had the interviews, we had the second interviews, we have a recommendation, we have the reference checks.
I don't have a recommendation.
I don't think we really need a formal vote on it. I think we've had the opportunity to offline, if there's any disagreement with the recommended hire.
I mean, that we vote to move forward with hiring someone.
Oh.
Are the references available to us? I mean,
Yeah.
I know that we had some discussions about wanting to hear what the references highlighted or
Yeah,
indicated.
I actually have a printed copy I can send over to you right now.
That'd be great.
But we can share them by email too.
Thanks.
The references that we did obtain were from people that he worked for and with. The one that we were waiting for was someone that worked for him.
Right.
The interview panel asked to get subordinate evaluation. That was the one we were waiting for.
Thanks.
I just want to, in light of the fact that it's a public meeting,
Yep.
I don't want to say name while we're talking about negotiating with a particular
Right.
candidate.
Did the committee arrive at a particular candidate? I know
Yes.
there were two.
Yes.
Okay, I interviewed people. I'm not up to speed on where people arrived, so
Okay.
I don't think I missed an email or anything, but I don't know what the consensus was after the interview, so I'd be open for another meeting if we had to call a special one to get this done, but I don't know where people arrived.
I thought that there had been an email. I apologize if there hadn't.
No,
but,
I didn't-
Of the people who interviewed, it was unanimous, a preference of one or
Okay.
the other.
I don't know that I was even solicited for my vote,
I
so
mean, everyone was invited to come to the meetings.
I
think
inter-
almost
I
everybody did.
don't know what meeting it was. Okay, perhaps I missed one, but
Yeah.
I don't recall that meeting.
I'm almost positive. In fact, I am positive that everyone was invited to the interviews.
To the interviews, right? There was
I went to the
another meeting
interviews.
after
I
that,
did the interviews.
Right.
I did the interviews with the candidates. I'm saying a meeting after that to arrive at a consensus of what was the best.
So our next step is just to reach back out, make an offer. We have a compensation range. The position has been evaluated using the county's personnel plan. So that is our next step, and then the individual will have to give notice, so there'll be some from the time that it's accepted. I think realistically, we're probably looking at this point, close, end of the year, just because of the holidays, because of the notice requirement that the person will have to give to current position.
Joanne, what I'd suggest is, again, in the interests of it being a candidate, I don't want to do this in the.
I agree.
open,
It
but-
should be an executive session
Yeah, what I
or
would suggest is we have a
offline.
few minutes after the meeting, perhaps
Okay,
we just
that's
huddle
fine.
and discuss more openly.
One of the matters that has been before this board in the past as well has been providing opportunities for the former staff. And as I said before, in many corrections-related facility staffing has been a real challenge. We noticed that when we were recruiting a new warden for George W. Hill, and it's the same situation that we heard directly from Chester County. There's a couple of opportunities. I am meeting with the representatives from AFSCME tomorrow, because one of the things that we had mentioned was providing training opportunities for the former staff to become corrections officers, because we also have staffing shortages at George W. Hill. And as we convert that to county-run operation, we want to make sure we reach out and access people who will provide the kind of oversight and service that we're looking for. So I will meet with AFSCME tomorrow, propose it to them. And even though it would be a different union, they're owed the courtesy of my conversation with them concerning potentially engaging the staff. That would include providing some sort of stipend while they go through certification training. It could include extending their medical benefits past the end of the year if they're engaged in the program, and then a commitment to serve for a certain minimum period of time without having to pay back any of the funds provided to them. So that's one option. The other that I mentioned briefly with Chester County is seeing if they would qualify to work in Chester County in the detention role. As we know, that situation is complicated a little bit by the Attorney General's investigation, but Mr. Cagle did commit to work with me to get through that as well. So those are some options for the staff. The county's paying for their medical benefits does run out at the end of the year, so I will move as swiftly as I can to see if those options are viable. And then the last item on the list was the status of the JDC and central processing. Under the task order IDIQ contracts for architectural services that council put in place, we have engaged KCBA, who actually did our facilities condition needs assessment, to provide an estimate to convert the facility to serve as both a juvenile detention center and as a central processing center. It is possible to physically segregate the buildings and keep them separate, so that we still need to go through a legal review to make sure that that's okay, but it is possible to separate out the buildings and create two separate facilities. Our next step is to make sure that we have some consensus on what those facilities will do and how we want them to look, and then we can engage the architect to actually do the design on our behalf. The estimated cost to do that work is around $67,000. It's funded. We can pay for it out of the county's capital budget. That's not a constraint. It's really more a matter, as I said at the beginning, of deciding what the function is so we can design what the form will look like. And again, it speaks towards getting the director engaged to help lead us through that discussion as well.
Just
Sir.
under that, I think the solicitor maybe should reach out to the Department of Human Services to see if it's even possible to have a juvenile detention facility and an adult central processing facility in the same building. I know I sent an email.
I have. Our solicitor has done.
Okay.
These are actually, Chris, these are separate buildings. They won't be physically connected at all. The question really is, can they be on the same campus, even if they're securely separated?
Well,
Is that
okay, I
right?
think that needs to be fleshed out,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's separate buildings or it's one building with a, divider where there's sight and sound separation, I think those are the questions that
Yeah.
our solicitor needs to flesh out with the state. But I want to just emphasize what Mr.
Thank you.
Lazarus said at the end there. I think, to me at least, this all really goes down to getting in place someone who day-to-day is managing this operation. I'm very appreciative to Ms. DiMatteo and her staff at the Probation Services for stepping up in the vacuum that existed since the Juvenile Detention Center shut down, and managing the contracts that are in place, managing the the array of services aside from probation, from detention. But we really need someone that's serving under this board to take that off of detention and under the courts, their day-to-day work, because they have other jobs day-to-day that they need to be doing.
Just two other items I'd like to address. One is, again, Mr. Madden and I had a conversation, and part of a redesign and reimagining is how do we want the facility to operate what kind of feel do we want it to have? Because if we go forward with the idea of reopening the facility and we do the renovations in a way that is a leading thought and practice type approach, we will then be able to have others come to us for the space, because for us to do it on the need that we've had by ourselves cannot really be financially justified. So if we do tend to look to reopen, we should do it in a way that is consistent with the values that we express. The last thing I just want to mention is I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the controller for her and her staff going to the building and cataloging the paperwork that's there. And I think, so Joanne, thank you very much for that and for your help in starting that process.
Other questions, comments from the board?
Wait, can I just explore what you just said about this not being financially feasible unless we take other counties or is that something that we've done, we did in the past when it was a bigger facility?
The number of young adults there was somewhere, 10 plus or minus. We had 74 staff assigned to the facility, including the juvenile kitchen. So that's a pretty large staff. You're talking as much as maybe 7, 8 staff members for every young adult that's there. It seems to be, just for our needs, to be a large financial burden.
Right, but we don't need to make it that big anymore. I mean, we could decide to only staff for average of 12 or something and have way less staff, right? Without the burden of having to take others to make ends meet. Is that?
I heard it really more as something for future consideration. I don't think there's any sort of horse that's left the barn that we're going to be, making some grand facility and renting out beds to other counties. I think it's just.
No, and I agree with that. I think it's really a matter of, if there's extra capacity, then it would be, the same service to our neighbors that they're providing to us, to if there's capacity there. But certainly the facility would be smaller than what it was in the past.
I would think there would be an opportunity to right-size this, and it's a good comment to go to Chester County. I only hear the number of beds that are in these facilities and what we have available. I don't have any idea what their capacity is. So it may be really instructional that maybe there's 30, maybe there's 20, but other people must have a right size. And we should be able to get our facility looks like it's huge. And, it's huge. And I don't know when if it was filled up, that's a horror in itself. So
when I spoke to Mr. Cagle and his director, I think theirs was the same size, was around 48 beds.
Yeah, ours now is more than 48 beds.
Yeah.
It's closer to 75 to 80, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was in the 60s.
Right.
That's my recollection. Is that right, Tina?
66.
66.
Yeah.
So,
Anything else from Mr. Lazarus?
Thank
well,
you.
thank you very much.
All right, we've had on the agenda for a few months now this discussion of presentations offered for future meetings, and I think it's just continues to be a good sort of placeholder in the event that there are other organizations or individuals that members of the board would like to invite to present to the board for own edification, for the public's edification. So I don't know if anyone from the board has anything they'd like to discuss today.
Well, I'd just like to follow up on our discussion about having the IU come in and present to the board what they used to do for education services in the Juvenile Detention Center and how that used to work prior to the closing down. And I actually spoke with them and they said they could come to our December meeting.
Excellent.
And I would suggest we heard from the Public Defender's Office, and the public have the opportunity to hear from the District Attorney's Office, the juvenile unit, or whomever they deem appropriate.
I just wanted to loop back on the facilities when you're done this conversation. Back to item 6, facilities, just to report on. I just want to report on the visit that we made to the facility because it's little more intensive, I think, just to plan. So we went with counsel and someone from my office that does record retention, and we looked at the facility. We identified where most of the documents are. There's also a lot of trash and other materials there. I really think that once we get the director on board, that we're really going to be looking at a contracting with someone to get the documents, retain them in accordance with direction from the Attorney General's office and counsel, and then record retention from the county history code that tells us what we have to keep. There were records subject to HIPAA there, but then it really needs to be cleaned. I don't know how we could move forward at all without really some kind of outside contractor coming in to do that. So I just give us a heads up that I think we're going to need some kind of contracted services for a cleanup. And we do have Park Police still looking at it, but having a building sit stale and unused is not good for a county asset, no matter what happens with it. I don't know where we go with it. So I just want you to know it's really a big project, and I think we still will need to really map out how that's done as soon as hopefully we have somebody on board to take the lead for us to do that. So I just wanted to let you know we did that, but it's actually a lot of work. Equipment. Oh, yeah, that's the other thing. There's a lot of equipment there that could really be either probably utilized in the county. Some of it not. Some of it is, but once someone gets there, we really need to catalog that, and all of it should be listed as an asset. It's in our records for the county, but there are things sort of wasting there. Copiers or computers and some things that are there that we should be able to get. So again, it's a kind of a big job.
All right. Any other new business?
Oh, I did want to bring up, I had talked about it last time, and I think a few of you were a little in agreement, thinking about trying to have somebody or even going out for an RFP to have a group or an individual kind of really do an assessment of the continuum of care in the different programs that are available to us at every single step in the process, so that we have, or really our new director, when they come on board, it would be a really good resource. And I'm talking about not just what we have right here, but what we have nationwide. Like YAP is a nationwide program. And so thinking outside the box and trying to really get an assessment of everything that's available to us. So then we can make the decisions of like, okay, these are the programs we have at this level, at this stage, and at this stage, and kind of going from there.
Yeah, I guess what I hear you saying is the contracts that the county currently has in the sort of, continuum of care, how do they slot in with, what's there, what's not there,
Right.
and what elements of that should be put out for RFP?
Yes, and kind of having someone, I think what you're saying, but also having someone really evaluate and look at what all the different programs are that are available to us nationwide, not ones that necessarily we already contract with, but that are available that maybe we didn't know were there, and really having a full buffet as we reassess this and look at it so that we can really implement the programs that'll be as effective as we want them to be.
Yeah, that's right. You use the term buffet, I use the term menu.
Yeah.
Either way, exactly. But under our purview, we should really be setting as robust a menu as possible.
Yes.
For the courts to tap into in their judgment for any particular case.
Yes.
As a follow-up to Dr. Taylor's comment, this process has really opened my eyes in a lot of ways, despite my experience. Hearing from juvenile probation, hearing from the candidates, the interview process, I realized that we've looked at this as kind of with a tunnel vision. This is our opportunity to have a wider gaze. Hearing those two candidates made me realize that. Going out to visit made me realize that. Hearing from the public defender at the public meeting that we were at made me realize that the public defender has a new view. I think we owe it to the district attorney to invite the district attorney to have a representative to come in here and hear their view, just as we heard from the public defender, and maybe even hear from some of the staff, OJJDP as well. This is our opportunity to do something different. When you look at OJJDP, you go on their website, there are a lot of things done around the nation that are really cutting edge that I think we should not close our eyes to. We ought to at least look at it and see. We may end up with something very, very different in terms of whether it's a new facility or whether we use the same facility and use it in a different way. But I think this is our opportunity, and this is the kind of thing I think you get one shot at it. So I shouldn't have used the word shot, should I? You get one opportunity at it. So I think we ought to think about that. I'm not trying to slow the process down, but I think this is our opportunity. I think if we kind of go in lockstep and say, okay, this is what we do. It's a facility. We open it about, we get the license and we move on. I think we're doing a disservice not just to the juveniles, but to the employees who would work there and to the general public as well. So.
And the good part about that, Your Honor, is that the license itself has so many requirements and regulations that it's not going to be that easy for us to get a license without doing the really important work. Making it a facility that is safe, making it a facility that is a trauma-informed facility. I mean, this is where we are today, and the other facilities around us who have had challenges are doing it currently, and I think we have the opportunity to learn from them as well. And I'd be happy to share that with the group about some really good things that are happening here in Delaware County with other facilities that unfortunately had same challenges and had to do what we're doing today. So I think, you know, when we're talking about the regulations and license, they're holding us to a high standard, which should be.
Yeah.
My apologies, I have to leave, but I would ask that at the end of this meeting, whoever's still here, please do go into executive session and make a decision about, I think it's the single most important thing we do right now, is make that offer. So I'm sorry I can't be here to do it with you, but I implore that by the end of this meeting, we have action to take on that.
Elaine, I'd be happy to be, certainly, you know, I voted that day, or I at least not so much voted. I provided my, you know, recommendation. I'm still concerned that one reference that we intentionally asked for has not called back. So I would hold any of my recommendation until that reference contacted back. I think that was important, and we were.
You all can, in executive session, decide what to do about that. And maybe it's a decision contingent upon that phone call.
Yep, sure.
Okay, all right, sorry, I have to.
I just wanted to final on the contracts, just for Vice Chair Williams. I did send an email, but I think it bounced. It was a zip file, and it didn't make its way through to you, so I'll have to split the file up. I did send it to council and to the chair and vice chair, which were the contracts that are highlighted, which were the detention and because there's 70 contracts here, and until I really knew what everybody wanted to really look at, I didn't, that was a lot of time to get things. So, and I just want to make a note that I did ask council, they're not redacted in any way, and I just want to make sure that if we send them out to everybody, that there's some instructions with what we do with them, or I think they could come out in a right to know request, but possibly with some redaction. So I just want to let you know that that is underway, so.
Thank you.
To go back to Ms. Linehan's remarks, I think it's important to note again, this board's formation occurred really in sort of stepping into a vacuum where we had recently shut down facility. And I think we have to sort of look twofold. One, in a near term, putting out the fire kind of a way. And I think our efforts with Chester County to put in place a contract that will, provide for far greater certainty of beds locally in an immediate term. I think we're doing that. I think we're hiring someone who can be our day-to-day quarterback for everything we're doing and can look at the array of services, but also doing all that while secondarily we're thinking in the long term. We're taking advantage of this opportunity that the judge refers to really reset how we look at things, which can always be continuously improved. But you're right. I think we have this great opportunity right now to really reset how we do things and go forward in a different way. Any other, I guess, other new business? Anything else from the board? All right. At this point, public comment. And this, again, isn't limited to things on the agenda. It can be anything related to juvenile detention in Delaware County. Sir, please just go to the podium. Please keep your mask on and give your name and address and keep your comments to less than 5 minutes, we ask.
Okay. Hello, my name is Patrick Farley. I live Governor Markham Drive, Glen Mills, Pennsylvania. I'm a registered nurse, and I've worked as an RN in Pennsylvania for the last 30 years in various specialties, including the ER, trauma, ICU, flight nursing, public health, and education. But for the last 19 years, I've proudly served in public service, working as an employee for the Delaware County as one of the nurses at the Juvenile Detention Center, providing health care to the juveniles. This entire staff at the Juvenile Detention Center has worked tirelessly for 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, working nonstop, weekends, holidays, blizzards, hurricanes, as essential frontline employees through the years. Our main focus has always been the health and safety of the children in our care. These are the same essential frontline employees that the public administration and county officials have publicly thanked, expressed gratitude, and claimed to support throughout the particularly difficult and dangerous tasks of maintaining safe, uninterrupted, in-person operations through the pandemic emergency. That is until March 13th, when we were suddenly placed on an indefinite, unpaid leave of absence. From the very beginning, we were both privately and publicly encouraged by the county to apply for temporary or permanent transfers to other county positions in order to maintain our employment. To date, we have received very infrequent communication from the county, even though we were assured several times that there would be monthly updates from them. Our last county communication letter that we received was 3 months ago on August 31st. In that letter, the county informed us they are going to initiate or redeploy the current employees on leave of absence in needed positions, and that we were also strongly encouraged to apply for any open positions within the county. Mr. Madden stated in public meetings that he would personally follow up with the employees and communicate regarding positions and redeployment. To this date, we have never had any communication or any follow-up from any of the employees, despite many email requests to HR and Mr. Madden. Many people have applied, myself as well, but as of this date, not one employee from the Juvenile Detention Center on leave of absence has been transferred, reassigned, or hired to another county position. The county has been actively recruiting RNs to fill understaffed positions, including paying outside agencies for recruitment. So I personally applied for 3 separate different positions in the county. The most recent was in the new Delaware County Health Department in September. I was recommended and referred by several professional county employees. I was interviewed by the recruiter and then by the clinical director of the Department of Health, who informed me that I was more than qualified and she was recommending me for immediate hire in the department. She informed me that she would send the paperwork to HR and that the recruiter would contact me within a week to review the job details. Once my request to transfer was sent to HR, it was immediately blocked by HR and/or the county. The HR nor Department of Health have replied to any of my numerous follow-up phone calls and emails that I've sent since September. I'm perplexed because I have a specific skill set that the county is searching and actively recruiting for. They have encouraged me to apply, and yet for some reason, I, along with the rest of the employees, seem to be punished for no reason. We are simply being denied the opportunity to work. Almost 50 hardworking employees of Delaware County, including myself, have been without a paycheck for 8 long months. Please remember that these are not just faceless employees. They are citizens, parents, community members who, together with their family, live in Delaware County and represent the communities you serve. We are the unseen human collateral damage of this reorganization. We simply want to work and provide for our children. I am eligible for retirement in just 10 months. A retirement that I've worked hard for 19 years to accomplish, and yet recently have been denied by the county an opportunity to continue my public service and complete this service despite my vast amount of experience for no apparent reason. We are unclear why we are being singled out, disregarded, ignored, and punished by the county and its representatives. I have emailed HR and Mr. Madden directly about our dire situations, including our desperate need for our family's insurance coverage, at least till the Juvenile Detention Center is ready to be reorganized or reopened. But to this date, I have not had the courtesy of even a simple reply or acknowledgement to our plight. As the holidays approach, now more than ever, we have become increasingly worried about our families. Benefits for our families are scheduled to be terminated in just 6 weeks. I wanted you to be aware that while some boast about the county's money savings and bringing balance to the juvenile system over the last 8 months, meanwhile, there are 50 families struggling in your community without paychecks, without insurance, and without hope, as your county's employees 8 months of indefinite, unpaid leave of absence drags on without any communication or support from those within the county. We have become increasingly desperately worried about our future, our children, our families, and as the holidays approach, we implore you for your support. Thank you.
I have to excuse myself, I have another meeting at 6. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. You can twist it.
Oh, yes, thank you. My name is Ashley Giles Perkins, and I am an attorney with the Education Law Center. We are a statewide serving organization. However, we are at 1800 JFK Boulevard in Philadelphia. And I was like just noting when I'm starting because I can't use my timer. And I actually did prepare more particularized comments, but I wanted to deviate slightly and really just say I've been pleased to hear some of the pieces today, particularly some phrases that I found to be really positive coming out of this situation that we are, still dealing with is an opportunity to look at this in a new way. I heard questions about educational quality and services. I heard being sure that things are trauma-informed and that we're focusing on safety and high standards. And so while I do want to still share on behalf of my clients that have not had positive experiences while at the facility and beyond that time into the present, I do not want this to be seen as a criticism of the board. And at the same time, I forgot who just said this, but on one hand, putting out a fire, and on the other hand, looking towards more long-term solutions. And so really wanting to highlight that last piece on what that may look like. And just briefly, the Education Law Center emphasizes really that students have a quality public education no matter where they are. We represent students that are often LGBTQ, they may be homeless, they may be English language learners, students with disabilities, children of color, children in foster care, and the juvenile justice system. My particular fellowship was specifically to represent students that are either in foster care or in juvenile justice that face educational barriers. And from actually the very second week of my fellowship, I have been working with students that were in the Delaware County area and continue to do so. We originally received complaints that there was no education happening for some students, and students with disabilities were not receiving access to special education services. They were not receiving credits. Students, as we know, may come in the middle, they may leave in the middle, and this presents barriers for them to be able to transfer back into their neighborhood schools and continue in their current grades. I have one particular client that was there for 60 days, and if she had been there for 61 days, she might have earned at least partial credits. Instead, the student returned from her placement, was sent to State Secure once the facility was closed, released from State Secure, and I worked closely with the student to help them enroll back into school. Even with the help of an attorney, they faced barriers, stigma, push out, delays in enrollment even after enrollment should have occurred, and then delays of coursework. Finally, they determined that the student was actually not in the right grade and would need to repeat the grade that they just had. I submitted transcripts from Lima indicating that the student has already taken English 11, not once but twice, but 3 times, and still this, because they did not earn credits, were unable to move into the 12th grade and graduate this year as they had hoped. So that is a deterrent and disconcerting for anyone. And in particular, this is not just this one student, this is many students. And what we're really advocating for today is some of the things that I've heard. And beyond credits, we have further institutionalization and homelessness that have occurred for some of my clients. And we believe that the solution is not necessarily reopening and refilling the detention center, nor is it to send youth further and further away from their homes and their families. We believe that the solutions are right here at home. And with family connections, the ability to stay in their neighborhood schools and continue to build strong ties with the community and receive community supports from advocates that are already located in this community and willing to provide. Without going into a plethora of statistics or data or even citing past testimony, and also I can't do that, I have 1 minute left. I will just end by emphasizing that keeping youth out of the system in the first place is and can be a priority for this board. It is not only cost effective, it's not only beneficial to our young people and their families, but it is the right thing to do. And I do want to add that if anyone is interested in some of the cost-saving measures or statistics about school stability or any of the other data in terms of all of the benefits that come with keeping students in their communities, I do have that available. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you for respecting the 5 minutes. Anyone else from the public?
Hi, good evening, folks. My name's Alicia Coffey. I work for CASA Youth Advocates, which is over at 26 East 4th Street, right here in Media. I'm here tonight representing the Voices for Children Coalition. We're a group of service providers and community members focused on systems change in Delaware County to enhance child well-being. I want to recognize that tonight I heard you're talking about still responding to the closure of our detention center and recognizing that it is an ongoing crisis that you're managing. And I just want to say how much I appreciate your work to do that. My comments tonight really are more future-focused, philosophical, and about that idea that we get to redesign and reimagine. And Voices for Children would like to play a role in helping us think about that, the function of our systems, which then does inform the form of our systems. So I want to say that through my work in Delaware County, I've been able to see systems that are willing to examine how both official policy and general operating procedures impact marginalized groups and people of color. I'm fortunate to be working in systems to be able to see that. Our community really is committed to equity. School districts, children and youth, and members of the judiciary have come together to investigate those systems to identify ways that they are inequitable. Concerning our juvenile justice system, we recognize that increasing transparency about sentencing and access to diversion is vital to make sure that we are addressing how racial discrimination in the justice system impacts who does end up going to more restrictive settings like detention centers. We recognize that getting involved with the juvenile justice system can negatively impact a young person's ability to comply with other requirements and other expectations of systems which govern their behavior. A brief example from my own experiences when I was doing casework. Marcus got involved with foster care when he was 6, and one of the wins of his experience is that his family did get the chance to stay together, and he had relationships with an older brother. Unfortunately, that older brother encouraged Marcus to move drugs across county lines. Marcus was caught just before he was 16, and he did enter a detention center. He was charged and convicted as an adult. After he was released, I became his independent living case manager, and he was just about to turn 18. With a felony on his record, Marcus could not get student loans to be able to attend community college, and he couldn't find employment. This means that he couldn't comply with the education employment requirements of children and youth to be able to extend his time in foster care past the age of 18, and he was scared to be discharged to homelessness. That would have been his situation. What do I say to a kid when he says, I never want to deal drugs again because I never want to get caught again? But if I'm going to get discharged to homelessness, I don't know what my choices are. Whew. I know we can prioritize accountability in our community without criminalization for young people who have committed crimes as minors. I know that Delaware County can offer less restrictive settings in our community for youth who have committed crimes where rehabilitation and community integration are prioritized. I also know that for the young people who do need more restrictive detention, we can make sure that those places are less traumatizing, do not derail emotional or educational development, and offer high-quality services provided by well-compensated, highly trained staff. Candace talked about those programs and those philosophies as a reality right here in our community. We must be a community who resorts to confinement only when necessary for public safety. We must make those decisions based on the facts of the case, not misplaced fear of our children or unacknowledged biases. I know we can get there together. I know we can be an example of best practices. I know that we can be a national shining example that we can brag about. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it. And I really hope that Voices for Children can continue to dream big and encourage our community to really be all that we know we can for our children and our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? All right. Any last comments from the board?
I do. In full disclosure and transparency for my board members and the public, I do sit as a member, as a representative for my full-time employer on Voices for Children. I've been excused or I have recused myself from any meetings, conversations, any agenda items as it relates to the Juvenile Detention Center.
Thank you.
So since we're making full disclosure, I'm on the CASA board. So
Okay.
we have a comment from Ms. Williams.
Ms. Williams.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Ms. Giles Perkins from Education Law Center for coming out. I think the perspective that she offers is a really valuable one, and one that I think the board ought to consider in the context of services and contracts that are available in the facility. And I hope that we can continue to use the Education Law Center as a resource. I think some of the data that she didn't quote for time's sake, I've read, and it's something along the lines of 65 to 75% of young people in detention have an IEP or have had issues in school or were referred from school into the juvenile justice system. So I think it just sort of underscores the importance of our looking at those contracts really closely and adding performance measures for those who might not be meeting the needs of our young people.
All right, thank you. For my part, I'll add my appreciation to Ms. Perkins and Ms. Coffey for coming in and presenting. I think they're, as we open up this opportunity that we have, I think, really the idea of kind of opening the doors and bringing in these stakeholders we have in the community who can help us to design as great a system as we can, we will be doing so. So I appreciate your coming in. And to Mr. Barley, who came into the employees of the former detention center. Again, I want to express, my appreciation for what they're going through. I think it is a extraordinarily, and I mean that in the sort of true sense of the word, it's an outlyingly challenging situation to be navigating. Because on the one hand, I do understand that, we have employees who have families and need to, provide for a paycheck. On the other hand, I think it needs to be understood that the allegations that were brought forth were quite serious, and they're being investigated by the Attorney General's office. And, that also can't be ignored.
Can't you continue benefits until the Attorney General is done? Why are we getting cut off December 31st?
And note the comment. I mean, the benefits are continuing through the end of the year, and perhaps they can continue further, but they're at least being continued through the end of the year. What I'd say is, we are doing, my understanding is that the county is considering employee candidates for other positions. I am not, the one that's evaluating each candidacy. I know that there is conversations that have to take place with the Attorney General's office. And what I'd also say is, as Mr. Lazarus made mention to, you have neighboring counties such as Chester County who need staffing. We have a jail at George W. Hill that, while it's not for juveniles, for adults, is also in dire need of staffing, specifically around medical. So I don't know if folks who used to work there are applying elsewhere, such as George W. Hill, but if they're not, I would certainly recommend that they do so. So that's really all I can share. Again, it's a really difficult situation. Any other comments from the board for today? All right. If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you.
No.